The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to eGestalt's webinar titled HIPAA HITECH Compliance, How to Effectively Manage the Security and Compliance Status for Your Business Associates and Subcontractors. Today's presenter is Anupam Sahai, co-founder and president, eGestalt Inc. Anupam is an accomplished management, marketing, and technology leader with 21 plus years of experience directing teams to develop and launch globally renowned products, generating up to $350 million annually. Prior to eGestalt, Anupam was Vice President Marketing for HIPAA Inc. He is a recognized expert in the areas of cloud computing, security, networking, and is a featured speaker at several industry conferences worldwide. If you have any questions, please send them via the questions function in GoToWebinar, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. If you'd like a copy of the presentation, please send an email directly to Anupam. His contact information will be given at the end. Thank you, Anupam, for presenting, and I'll turn the webinar over to you now.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon. So the topics that I will cover today, I'll start off by talking about HIPAA HITECH and what the requirements are for medical providers and their business associates, including subcontractors. Then I'll talk about the best practices and caveats that we have gathered from real-world experiences if you want to implement HIPAA HITECH, and more specifically around vendor management or around subcontractor management. Then I'll talk about SecureGRC, an automated tool for doing this process in a totally automated fashion with very little supervision, and finally conclude the session. Before I begin, I want to just throw out some disclaimers that HIPAA and HITECH is a very dynamically evolving field and area, and the information, while we've tried to make our best effort to make the information current and up to date, it is provided as is without warranty. And if you want to use the information for auditing and legal purposes, it's really not the intention that this is going to be ready for that. You might want to consult your own legal counsel, auditors, or advisors for doing the same. So let me start off by describing what is HIPAA and HITECH for people who might be new to the topic. So HIPAA stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. This was enacted by the government in 1996. HITECH was enacted in 2009 as part of the American Recovery Act, and it stands for Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health Act. Pretty mouthful. Some of the acronyms that you'll hear me refer to during my presentation. HHS stands for Department of Health and Human Services. This is the agency responsible for protecting the health of all Americans. OCR stands for Office of Civil Rights. This is the enforcement agency, enforcement of HIPAA HITECH, for example. PHI and ePHI. PHI stands for Protected Health Information, and ePHI is the electronic version of Protected Health Information. And I'll talk a little bit more about what the scope of Protected Health Information is. And finally, C stands for Covered Entity. It's a medical provider. And BA stands for a business associate. So the primary objective for enacting both HIPAA and HITECH was to improve the quality and the cost of administration of healthcare. And this is done by using technology to allow sharing of healthcare information and make it portable across different providers. And in the process, HIPAA and HITECH provides a set of safeguards for protecting PHI, and this is done through privacy and security measures to ensure there is no accidental misuse of data. So again, the purpose of HIPAA HITECH is to improve the quality of healthcare by lowering the cost through use of technology and other means of safeguarding the data. So who is a covered entity? A covered entity could be a healthcare provider, it could be a health plan or it could be a healthcare clearinghouse. Anybody who's offering medical services, such as doctors, clinics, psychologists, dentists, anybody who interacts and interfaces with customers is a healthcare provider, is a covered entity. It could also be insurance companies and other exchange clearinghouses who allow sharing of information. Who is a business associate? A business associate is anybody who has access to PHI from the covered entity, and they are bound by the same regulations as a covered entity is. And this is a new scoping as per the HITECH regulation, HITECH law as of 2009. So the type of business associates could be ranging from EMR vendors, electronic medical record vendors. It could be IT service providers. It could be labs, accountants, lawyers, web hosting providers, even garbage collectors. Everybody who deals with medical businesses and has potentially access to protected health information is in the scope of being a BA, including subcontractors. So as of the HITECH Act, which was enacted in 2009, there were a number of absolute game changers that were announced, which essentially lead to more rigorous and vigorous enforcement of HIPAA. And this is done by increased fines. So the fines for violating or not being HIPAA HITECH compliant have gone up from $100 previously to $50,000, up to $1.5 million per year. There are new criminal liabilities in place in case you're found not to be compliant or if data is breached. There is now ability provided to state auditor generals to bring civil actions on behalf of the citizens. As I mentioned earlier, business associates and subcontractors are obligated and in the scope of HIPAA HITECH compliance as per the HITECH law. And there are new data breach notification requirements for both covered entities and business associates. So if a data breach happens accidentally or through malicious intent, it needs to be reported to the HHS within a specified duration. The duration varies depending on the size of the breach and to the extent of breach that's happening. So what's driving the market? Clearly, one of the key drivers for the market is the federal stimulus money, which is driving the adoption of electronic medical records. And government has put aside about $28 billion of stimulus money for EMR, electronic medical record implementation. What that means is doctors and hospitals are eligible for federal grants. Doctors can get up to $44,000 and hospitals can be eligible to get about $2 million from the government to upgrade their healthcare IT infrastructure and more specifically upgrade to electronic medical records. And there are about 600,000 healthcare providers and 1 million of BAs that are now in the scope of compliance, and they need to be compliant. But in order to get the money, they need to demonstrate what is called meaningful use, and the number of sections in meaningful use clause requirement-wise. But one of the key requirements that we'll concern ourselves today is around protection of electronic healthcare information, which requires a security risk analysis as per HIPAA HITECH requirement. So why should we know about this? Is this something that is going to affect us? This is a typical question that I get asked by our customers or prospective customers. Yes, this is an important aspect of ensuring. So any compliance regulation, whether it's HIPAA HITECH or PCI for the credit card industry, compliance is essentially the best practices, the security best practices of the day around protecting a single asset. In the case of HIPAA HITECH mandates a set of security best practices to protect PHI, protect patient health information. And by implementing HIPAA HITECH, you not only become compliant with HIPAA HITECH, but you have best-in-class security practices that make you more secure. So security and compliance go hand in hand. And if you're prone to breaches, which is happening pretty much by the day, by the week, there are very high-profile incidents of breaches and information getting leaked out that can potentially be prevented by implementing HIPAA HITECH guidelines. And you can see here that breaches of personal health information is very widespread. In 1 year, there were about 6 million records that were breached. This included 40% of breaches, 40 to 50% of breaches happening from business associates, and these are breaches that involve more than 500 people. Small data breaches, which are breaches involving less than 500 individuals, were also numerous. There were about 9,100 breaches in the first year of reporting after the HITECH law was enacted. And HHS maintains a so-called wall of shame where they post every breach that's taking place around the country. So once you go there, you'll see that all kinds of institutions, small, medium businesses, large hospitals, they potentially have reported breaches pretty much on a regular basis, once or twice a week throughout the year. And this is one of the latest reports that you might have read, where TRICARE was hit with a big lawsuit following a breach of data. The numerous incidents around HIPAA HITECH related violations, around accidental or malicious release of data, compromise of data, which can cause audits by the government or huge fines and potentially criminal prosecution. So let's dive a little bit deeper on defining the scope of protected health information. So protected health information includes information about the individual, which could be name, address, birth date, social security number, demographic data, or it could be anything related to the health condition of the person or individual. It could include physical, mental, or it could also include any payment-related information. So anything that can be tracked down to a particular individual that is available in the covered entity or business associate and the subcontractors needs to be protected. And the protection is in scope for not only physical data, which means if you have lots of files which have patient information, that is something that needs to be protected, or it could be electronic information in the form of electronic medical records that need to be protected. So as per HIPAA HITECH privacy and security rule, there are really 4 categories of procedures, processes that need to be implemented. There are a set of administrative safeguards that ensure security plans, policies, procedures, and training are in place for the employees of the company and for people who handle PHI. There are physical safeguards like electronic cards and physical security access, etc., to protect devices and media which capture and which contain PHI information. And then there are 2 categories of technical services or mechanisms, such as authentication, authorization tools that the business needs to implement to ensure that PHI information is secured and is accessed only by people who need to know. And if the information is being transmitted over the net locally or over the internet remotely to subcontractors and BAs, that also needs to be secured and ensured that the information is not intercepted in the middle by some malicious entity or a group or a person. So the bottom line requirement from the security perspective is that PHI must be secure, whether it is sitting locally, sitting at rest, on servers, workstations, backup media, etc. Or if the data is in transit, either stored on the web locally or accessed remotely via laptops, mobile devices, online email, etc. All of those access of patient information, patient data needs to be secured, and safeguards need to be maintained to ensure that it is secure. So the key questions are, what do covered entities and business associates need to do to protect PHI and to ensure that they're following HIPAA HITECH guidelines? And also a side effect of that is that how does a covered entity feel safe and feel trustworthy to trust their BAs and subcontractors with the PHI data? What can the covered entities or the business associates do to ensure that there's no breach of data? So with respect to the CE, the covered entity has a shared responsibility along with their business associates to implement HIPAA HITECH to ensure that business associates are safeguarding PHI information, because they are the ones, the covered entities are the ones who are interacting with their patients, with their customers, to gather the data, gather PHI information, which is then shared downstream with business associates and their subcontractors. The covered entities are and have shared responsibility with the subcontractors and business associates to ensure that they're safeguarding the data. And what is really at stake is their reputation and fines for violating the HIPAA HITECH requirements. So the starting point there is to have a good BA agreement, business associate agreement, which allows the covered entity to specify what safeguards and mechanisms does the BA or the subcontractor need to have in place to protect PHI. There needs to be a risk management program in place by the business associate and the subcontractors, and also safeguards and mechanisms as part of HIPAA HITECH to ensure that only permitted use and disclosure of PHI is taking place. There needs to be a breach notification plan in place. So if there's a breach that happens in a BA, they need to report it to CE as per the requirement of HIPAA HITECH within a specified duration. And of course, this allows the covered entity to get the federal grants that they need. If they are HIPAA HITECH compliant and their BAs and vendors that they work with, then it helps them to make the case to get the federal grants. And at the end of the day, this makes them secure and compliant. Similarly, from the BA perspective, they have a shared responsibility with the covered entities to implement and protect the PHI data. They need to implement the HIPAA HITECH's privacy and security rules. They themselves need to put together vendor agreements in place to ensure that if they have subcontractors, they need to be protecting and safeguarding the data. A lot of the recent breaches that have taken place in Stanford Hospital and the TRICARE Hospital was a result of accidental disclosure by the BAs of patient information. So business associates have an equal responsibility to ensure protection and safeguard of data. And the covered entity needs to ensure that they are putting safeguards in place. And the BAs also need to put breach notification mechanisms in place to inform covered entities if there's a breach, and the guidelines provided by HIPAA HITECH for that. And of course, these make you secure and compliant from both not only the covered entity perspective, but also from the BA perspective. So the key questions that we are after today as part of our session topic is, what can the covered entities do, and what are the questions that they need to ask their BAs, business associates, and external vendors to ensure that any PHI information that they're sharing is being protected. And while having a business associate agreement is a good start, but what else does do they need to do? And what are the things that they need to mention in the business associate agreement to ensure that data is being protected? So one of the key questions that they need to start asking the BA is whether they have done a self-assessment for HIPAA HITECH compliance. Self-assessment is really a status check with respect to what the current status of their compliance level is. What are the gaps that were found during the self-assessment? And what were the steps taken to remediate the gaps or plug the gaps that were found? And if the business associates or vendors have been audited by third parties, ask them to furnish a report on compliance so that the covered entity knows exactly what the status is. And I'll talk about SecureGRC, which provides a tool and a report that allows you to get this answer very quickly in an automated fashion. The second question to ask is, after a self-assessment was done, what's the risk assessment? So if gaps were found, what's the priority level of those gaps? What's the risk exposure from the covered entity perspective for these gaps? And they need to provide a copy of the results. And specifically, we need to look into risk exposure with respect to remote access, either by laptops, mobile devices. And if you look at the breaches that have taken place, a lot of the breaches have taken place because of remote access. Either laptops accessing data remotely and the laptop was misplaced or stolen, or mobile devices were misplaced or stolen. And so being able to ask these questions around risk assessment and the results of the risk assessment is important. Another key question to ask is, what's the organizational maturity to deal with PHI? Have the employees been trained? Has there been a background check done for the employees to ensure that they have the information and the knowledge that they should not be sharing, for example, patient information in social chat rooms? There was a case recently about patient information being discussed in a public forum. That's an absolute no-no. So things like that needs to be asked. Those questions need to be asked. The next question to ask is, how is the PHI information going to be stored, accessed, and transmitted? Are they going to have authentication procedures in place? Are they going to be using encryption as the data is being transmitted over the web? And what kind of mechanisms are being put in place to ensure that the data is stored, accessed, and shared or transmitted in a secure fashion? Those are very important questions to ask. I talked about employee training. That's another important aspect of a question that we need to ask. Do the employees undergo a privacy and security training? Do they understand how the data needs to be shared? That they need to take permission from the customers to share the data. All those are important part of the training requirements. And the covered entities, number of our covered entities that our customers ask for, allowing them to do an on-site review or an audit through a third party, or they could conduct an audit through a tool like SecureGRC. And this gives them a first-hand glimpse of how the privacy and security is handled on a day-to-day basis. And all the things that I talked about is valid for subcontractors. Subcontractors of the business associates or subcontractors of the covered entity. Do the subcontractors have the right training, the right background check for the employees, and right privacy and security mechanisms in place to ensure protection and safeguard of PHI data? And all of this should be put in a contract so that nobody's surprised. And given that especially large covered entities and hospitals have a lot more leverage with their business associates and vendors, we find a number of our clients are doing that today. So the question becomes, how do we ensure and manage the process to gather all the information, ask the right questions, and implement a vendor management program, a BA management and a vendor management program, to do this with very little manual work. Typical covered entities may have 100 to 200 business associates, and trying to keep up with all the business associates through a manual process can be very expensive, not to mention the time and resources it takes to get there. So I want to talk about SecureGRC, which is a tool that automates this whole process of vendor management, BA management, in a very cost-effective manner. SecureGRC is the first true cloud-based solution, and we sell through the channels only, and it allows scaling up from a small single-user business entity all the way to large enterprises. And I'll take you through the tool in terms of the ease of use and the best practices and policy and procedure templates that come along with the tool that enables end users and our channel partners to provide these services, implement these services without having a lot of domain expertise. The tool provides the domain expertise, as it were, which is built into the tool. And it's about 10 to 20x cheaper than anything that's out there. And it's very affordable thereby. The product comes in 3 different versions. There's a small business version, there's an enterprise version, and then there is a vendor and BA management version, which is basically the SMB version of the tool or the enterprise version of the tool with vendor management packaged together. And as I said earlier, it scales up seamlessly. The same GUI functionality and platform scales up seamlessly from small 1 or 2 doctor office practices all the way to large hospitals and regional hospitals. So adding a bit more color to what SecureGRC is, it essentially has a web-based self-assessment questionnaire, which is essentially a set of yes-no questions that end users or SSEs can walk through. They can upload evidence as they're walking through the tool, walking through the questions. And as they're walking through the tool, they also have access to procedures and policies and best practices that allow them to to interpret and answer the questions that are being asked to them. Because some of the requirements are close to being legal, and it's legalese, so it's very hard to understand sometimes. But the tool provides the interpretation for these regulations, for these questions, and tells you what does it take to become compliant or to be able to answer a yes to these questions. And if you don't know or if you cannot answer a yes because you don't have the policy or procedure implemented, the tool provides it for you. You can download the recommended best practice or the policy template, customize it to your organization needs, and you're on your way. So this is an example of what a breach notification policy document would look like. It's a template. You can customize it. It also provides guidance, elaboration on what the citation is requesting information-wise. It provides a set of best practices, which tells you what is the right thing to do to implement something that's not potentially in place today. And it also tells you the risk parameters, that as you answer the questions, what's your risk exposure, and at the end will give you a complete real-time status view of the dashboard, of the compliance status, what the risk level exposure is, and this is a bar showing the risk level. And as you answer questions, hopefully you move to the left with the risk exposure going down. And this can be observed by the end user, the SSE, or our channel partners to find out the progress of the end users as they're moving through the assessment. So coming back to the BA and vendor management process, it's again a 5 to 6 step process. You create a covered entity account, add a list of business associates and external vendors that need to be managed, and the tool then sends out a sample questionnaire, which we call HiScan questionnaire. It contains about 20 questions. Doesn't include the full questionnaire, but these are the 20 critical questions that are sent out to business associates and vendors. When the email notification is received by the business associates and vendors, they log into SecureGRC, answer the questions, and the responses give a snapshot of all the responses that the various BAs and vendors have provided. And the covered entity has a one-stop view of the risk and the responses from all the BAs. What this allows the covered entities to do then is to figure out which are the most risky vendors, risky BAs that they need to pursue to get them compliant, and then follow that up with the medium and low priority ones. So all of this is done in an automated fashion without picking up the phone or sending emails. The system does it for you. All you need to enter is a list of BAs that you want to make sure and ensure compliance with, and the system mails out and does everything, tracks all the responses, provides all the rolled up view, and then it allows the covered entities then to pursue, again using the tool, pursue the high-risk vendors to make them compliant. So this is basically the set of steps that need to be done. I want to show you some pictures that illustrate the same thing. This is the login screen, and you upload a list of email addresses and phone numbers for the BAs that is populated in the tool. You select the users that need to receive the HiScan questionnaire. These are your external vendors or business associate users who will be answering the questionnaire. The questionnaire looks something like this. It's a series of 20 questions, but they pertain to the high-level questions that I asked earlier. They're built into the questionnaire, and every question has a yes and no response. Everything has got detailed guidance, as I showed earlier. Every question has detailed guidance that allows business associates and vendors to walk through the questionnaire and be able to answer yes or no in an intelligent fashion. And once the questions are being answered, both the covered entity and the channel partner will have a real-time status view on how many questions have been answered by which BA or vendor and what the status is, so that they can call them up, pursue it further if necessary. Otherwise, outcomes are report on compliance, which can be generated once all the questionnaires have been answered. And this report on compliance is really the latest status of the compliance status. It tells exactly the status of each of the BAs and what the compliance status is. So each row here is corresponding to a business associate. In this case, the covered entity had sent out the questionnaire to 7 business associates. And for example, Eve's Labs is 73% compliant. The risk rating is very high. It's sorted by risk rating. So Eve's Labs, Charles Research Center, and Calvin Research Center are the most high-risk BAs, which means that they don't have many compliance practices, best practices, or safeguards in place, followed by the next 3, followed by 1, which is moderately high risk. So as a covered entity, this should raise up an alarm bell for me, because if I share data with Eve's Labs, that means I'm not sure whether the data can be secured or not. And if data gets breached, then I'm in trouble, I being the covered entity. And you can go a bit deeper to figure out which controls are not compliant, how many of them are non-compliant, and you can get complete analysis of which mechanisms are lacking in which particular BA or vendors to kind of go after them and work with them to get them to be compliant. So typically what our covered entities do is, once they get the report on compliance with the risk exposure, they send an official email or a letter to the BA to get them to be compliant, and have them adopt the tool to move them towards compliance through a process of remediation. So in conclusion, I just want to reiterate that while HIPAA HITECH has a lot of benefits, there's a lot of federal stimulus money in awaiting doctors and large hospitals who are going to be compliant. There are some responsibilities that come along with it, and penalties and other issues that come about if compliance is not done quickly. So CE covered entity has certainly shared responsibility with the business associates to implement and proactively enforce HIPAA HITECH, to protect PHI, and to ensure data is not breached by any of its business associates and vendors. While there's a carrot from the government on on getting the federal dollars, if data does get breached for whatever reason, it could lead to a lot of not only fines and prosecution by the government, but also the risk of ruining the reputation and potential lawsuits. So the recommendation is that there should be a formal vendor management program that should be in place, and SecureGRC is one tool that allows you to do that in a totally automated fashion. And security and compliance is a journey. It's not a one-time event. It's not a once-in-a-year event. It's a constant set of procedures, training, and processes that need to be put in place to ensure that PHI information is protected, and if new employees join the company or new infrastructure is added in the company, all of them need to follow HIPAA HITECH guidelines. So with that, I will open this up for any questions that might be there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anupam. Thank you for presenting today. To the attendees, if you have any questions, please go ahead and submit them via the questions area of GoToWebinar. Anupam, we have our first question. Can the emails be imported via script?
Yes, it can be.
Okay, next question. What are the shared risks associated with vendor management, and what if they are not doing it?
Yeah, so the shared risk, as I said, is that it's the responsibility of both the covered entity and the business associate to ensure that the PHI information is being safeguarded. So if the BA gets breached and they report to covered entities, both the covered entities and the BAs can be prosecuted by the government or be sued by their patients and customers. So the shared responsibility is really to ensure that both the covered entities and business associates are HIPAA HITECH compliant, they understand the risks involved, they've done a risk assessment, etc., etc. And so it is a shared responsibility.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anupam. Next question. How does SecureGRC help alleviate the risks?
So SecureGRC automates the whole process of figuring out the compliance status of the business associates and vendors, and then it allows you to understand the risk exposure and then manage the whole process of getting the assessment done, figuring out the risk status, and then pursuing the business associates or vendors who are not compliant to make them compliant. So all of this is done through the tool in an automated fashion, and it's got all the infrastructure requirements taken care of for you.
Okay, next question. You use the terms like have controls, safeguards, be secure. Are these further defined? What qualifies as quote unquote secure?
That's right. The tool provides clear definitions around what it means to secure the data and how to do it. That is part of the best practices and implementation guidelines that will be there in the tool. If you're interested to learn more about it, let's take it offline and we can talk you through it.
Does it specify technology? follow-up question?
It depends on control to control, because some specifications exist for particular kind of technology, but typically it's technology agnostic. And you can implement encryption. For example, you can implement encryption by many means. So it doesn't specify that you need to buy XYZ tool to get encryption done. But it does say that you need to encrypt your data as it flows over the wire. And there are many means to acquire that and get that encryption done.
Okay, thanks, Anupam. How is SecureGRC priced?
So SecureGRC pricing for the tool starts at $750 a year. And of course, channel partners have a freedom to price it the way they want it based on additional services. And large enterprise version starts at $7,500 per year. The vendor management program, which basically adds on top of this, that is dependent on the number of BAs that you're going to send out the questionnaire to. So we can, if you have a specific deployment scenario in mind, reach out to me and we'll get you a good price quote.
Okay, thanks, Anupam. We have no more questions. I wanted to thank Anupam for presenting today, and thank you to the attendees for attending. We've recorded this webinar, so we'll have a recording of it up on eGestalt's website at www.egestalt.com. That's www.egestalt.com, and Anupam's contact information is right there on the screen. Feel free to call him or email him with any questions. And thank you again, Anupam, and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.